Okay, I'd like to call the Financial Affairs Committee meeting to order. We will start with a roll call, starting with Ms. Murphy.
Robin Murphy, present.
Ross Whiting, present.
Daniel Schultz, present.
Zachary Epps, present.
Leah Mulhern, present.
Jennifer Logan, present.
Charles Bedell Williams, present.
Mia
Blitzstein, present.
Pamela Henry, present. Okay, I will turn it over to Mr. Springer.
It's.
Oh. Approval of the last month's minutes.
So moved. Checked.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. The minutes are approved. Thank you.
Thank
Now I'll
you.
turn it over to Mr. Springer.
Thank you, Pam. Me again.
Come on, we can be more enthusiastic. Here, here.
Thank you, thank you. Very good. So first, as usual, first on the agenda is take a look at our interim financial statements as kind of a measure of how we're doing as the year progresses. Again, pointing out, we are doing really well. We have a nice healthy cash balance. Obviously we have some bills to pay, but to date through November, we have a nice increase in cash from year to year. Looking at our revenue and expenditures, as it appears in our balance sheet, we are looking at revenues of 114 million versus 105 million this time last year. Expenditures of 46 million versus 43 million dollars this time last year. So overall, $6 million increase in our revenues over expenditures on a cash basis.
Hey, Josh, can you make that any larger? It's just hard for me to see it from back here. Perfect. Mr. Schultz.
And I apologize if you already said this. Do you know what the difference, is it a timing?
We'll talk about it in this.
Understood. Thank you. All right. Edge of my seat.
It doesn't get much more exciting. So last year at this time, we were a little ahead of the game in recording and posting some of our revenues against receivables. So some of this increase is really just transactions that need to be a drawdown on our receivables. So not all of this is a true increase, but we are seeing increase year over year. And when we look at the local source revenue collections over the past 5 years, you'll see highlighted where that is. So I'm going to focus more on the expenditure side because that's more telling about where we are from last year versus this year. And if you remember last meeting, we were looking at interim financial statements and we were very concerned about special ed. We were showing a large increase. So some of that is we paid tuitions in advance for the entire year. Some of that's catching up with us. So it was a much bigger increase last year. It's still a big increase year over year this year, but some of that's tuition related to the timing of payments. We will see an increase year over year because we do have more pairs hired. We still have more support staff working in our buildings than we did this time last year, which is part of an element of being fully staffed and part of an element that we have more of a need based on our student population. The other area to point out is maintenance. Year over year, we are almost $1 million over. So a lot of that cost is coming in summer projects where our own internal staff did work to get Epic up and running through a custodial cleanout. After they were done their shift at their building, they had to come then work at Epic to get that building prepped. Through our maintenance guys fixing up that building, getting it ready, ready to work. Through some of our vendors coming in and making sure that building was appropriately working from a heating and cooling standpoint, which it needed some work to get up and running. So a lot of that increase is directly related to that work over the summer to get that building running. And not really an increase of expenditures spiraling out of control and recurring year to year. The next point I want to highlight is our central services, our IT information technology. One of our large ESSER expenditures actually hit in July, not in June. The grant ended as September 30th, 2024. So we still have a little bit of overlap hitting this fiscal year. And it was $400,000 of smart boards that hit in July. So that in essence is the increase year over year in IT. Employee benefits, we had an annual audit from a couple years ago that resulted in more premium due. That was a one-time hit. That was $125,000, and that makes up this difference down here in employee benefits. So overall, this $3 million growth, some of it is real, some of it is one time, and hopefully a lot of this will level out as we get to the end of the year. Any questions on the statement of net assets?
Question around the contract we just ratified. Will that be reflected? What's the timeline for those changes to be reflected in?
So we are working diligently to get the contract up to date, to get whatever retro amounts are due in December. So hopefully by next board meeting, we will see the ramification. So what that contract has on our statements through January.
Thank you.
Or through the end of December, I should say.
And that would be retroactive for this year, correct? So for new board members, that just means it will be as though we had paid the contract rate as though the contract had been ratified before the year started.
Yeah, so when we put that on a graph like this, there would be a slight uptick for that, reflect on that in December. All right, so now moving on to our local revenue, our historical collection. Last year at this time, we had a $600,000 TIF payment we had to make that was partially in arrears, and that pulled down our real estate tax collections. If that didn't happen, we'd have a $1.2 million change year over year, which is reflective of our tax rate increase, 1.4% tax rate increase to cover this year's expenditures. Looking at the rest of the categories, earned income taxes are still strong through the end of November. Everything else, I would call this relatively flat. Our transfer taxes are relatively flat. Our real estate taxes are flat year over year. And you can see our interest income is starting to move downward as interest rates are slowly decreasing. Obviously, every time we watch the news and I hear something about interest rates, it's hot on my mind because this could have such a large impact on our budget overall. Interestingly enough, there was more movement predicted by this time that hasn't occurred. So it's looking like we might have a stronger earnings on investments year than we would have anticipated at the beginning of the year. Any questions on the local revenues? All right, the next three items are all board action items and board resolutions. The first one is the approval of the Eastern Center for Arts and Technology 2025-2026 operating budget. So we are approving a budget of $1.4 million, which represents a 5% increase year over year. As you recall, the Eastern budget is based on two factors. One is the operating budget, which is directly related to the number of students that the school district sends in proportion to other districts. And the other is the relation of our step value, our taxable assessment value in Cheltenham versus the rest of the ascending districts in southeastern Montgomery County. So the biggest impact the biggest change we've seen has been in enrollment in the tech school. So our enrollment is growing quite a bit, 10%, but our contribution only increased 5%. That probably means that other districts are seeing larger increases in their assessments than we are, and it's netting itself out. And our increase is 5% of the operating budget. Any questions on the operating budget. There's a lot more detail in the packet that was presented that will be distributed. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If I can answer them, I will. If I can't, we'll direct them to Eastern. All right, the next board action item is the opt-out resolution. Putting together our preliminary budget. We've had some surpluses in recent years. There isn't any reason to believe that we would need to raise taxes greater than the state allowed Act 1 index, so to speak. Our current year Act 1 index is 4.7%. By December, it is required by the Pennsylvania Department of Education that the board indicates whether it intends to increase taxes greater than that index, greater than 4.7%, or somewhere less than 4.7%. So 0 to 4.7%. So this resolution is just opting to the Department of Education saying our tax increase will be somewhere less than 4.7%. So between 0 and 4.7%. Any questions on the opt-out resolution? So I included in the Act 1 timeline. We are here. This resolution is due before January 4th. So this is our last chance to meet as a board and approve this opt-out resolution before the January 4th deadline. And we took a look at this a couple months ago. This is the history of Act 1 indexes. Whenever your market value personal income aid ratio exceeds 0.4, then you are eligible for a adjusted Act 1 index. So last year, our market value personal income ratio is 4.169. So we got an adjustment upward of 0.7%. And as a refresher, this ratio is a measure of your taxable real estate tax assessment versus number of students and your personal income per household versus number of students. So it's trying to measure a district's relative wealth, so to speak, versus the number of students versus enrollment. Any questions on the Act 1 index or the opt-out resolution? All right, just when you thought it couldn't get more exciting, one more board resolution. So for those of you who remember, when we talked about the approval of the state budget, the state had approved a ready to learn block grant tax equity supplement, which for Cheltenham School District amounted to $1.1 million. As part of the application process to apply to the state for this money, we are required to draft a board resolution stating the purpose of how are you going to receive this money. So there are 5 different purposes you can use this money for. The one I highlighted is the one that we are choosing, which is to mitigate and preventing increases in millage rates. So essentially, this money will be used to balance the budget, so that no additional millage rate will be required to meet our expenditure for next year. And I highlighted the actual grant amount here on the bottom. So then we'll attach this resolution to our application and we'll submit it to the state in January.
Dr. Whiting?
Said another way, this is like reducing our tax burden from our district by about 1%.
Roughly, yes.
Mr. Epps?
Yep. Hopefully there's more clarity about what the application looks like since the last time.
It's a one-pager.
Oh, wow. Is that a good thing?
Good thing.
Hopefully that's a good thing when it comes to
Well,
grants.
let's get
Very- Yeah, well, 48 pages. Because I just recall the last time you talked about it could have been like very granular how we were going to use the funds, but if it's this big umbrella of just mitigating the millage rate, it seems like it gives us a lot of flexibility, which is better than what we heard last time.
So there still is a lot of information from the state on how they monitor how this grant is spent and how it's in compliance. So we'll keep whatever documentation we can to show that it's used to balance our budget. Obviously, this money would absolutely be used as a revenue source, and we wouldn't have to increase taxes as a result. So, to me, we're meeting that requirement immediately. But the 25-26 tax year has to pass before we officially met it. So we may get the money in February, but it is in essence deferred revenue until next year until we met that obligation.
Got it. I thought it was applied, I guess I thought it was more applied to.
I think that was the intention, but because the budget came out in July.
Because of the timing of it,
There was no opportunity for districts to show how they were going to use it to offset real estate taxes because all of their budgets were already passed.
Got it. So this, just bring it all together. This number is actually based on our, I guess it would be a previous need that we've expanded our tax by, or we've increased the tax percentage by, but it's used to then, for next year, but we might have already increased our taxes again.
So the exact formula, how it was calculated, it was given to districts who have a tax base. The tax base is more dependent on residents versus commercial
Yeah.
or industrial.
I get it.
Sorry, you might have to repeat the second half.
Yeah, it just seems like I'm just wondering, like, by the time we know how much we're getting, we're gonna need more. And so so it's just wondering how is this actually gonna work out as time moves forward, if it's always gonna be like a year or two behind.
Well, that's a good,
Yeah.
that's a good question, because if they
Yeah.
approve this year's budget in May, and there's another tax equity supplement, that we have two payments hitting. So,
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that until it happens, and if that happens, then what impact does it have on the millage rate going into next
This is why we need a predictable formula.
Right, which goes back to.
I just have a comment. I want to give you all like a ray of hope. One of my team members lives in New Hampshire in a 2,900 square foot house. Her property taxes, her school taxes are $20,000 a year. And their teachers are still dramatically underpaid. She lives in New Hampshire.
Big local contribution.
Is that, I was in stick, I had to confirm, I just confirmed it. I was like, I think I heard her wrong. Maybe she meant 2,000. And she just confirmed it for me. 20 grand a year. On a single square foot house.
So we have more information on what that looks like for next year, we'll present it. But certainly it creates a budgeting challenge when you get a large sum of money in 1 year versus the next. Not that the district is not grateful for
Right.
receiving it. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
The investment from the state in the Cheltenham School District this year was certainly historical by all means. And it
Now,
comes,
this grant right here too, isn't it the one that while there's not a confirmation, at least the hope is that we'll get it, some money next year also? Or no?
so I think that's how it was written. It was based off of a allotted sum of money that was supposed to last 7 or 8 years.
Okay,
But every budget by the state is approved annually. It's not you
Right.
don't approve multi-year budget.
Gotcha.
So it's always subject to change. But again, historical budget year for Cheltenham School District, and certainly couldn't have come at a better time when we have new steel standards, we have new science standards need to be adopted, we have more curriculum, we need to more curriculum work that needs to be done. So the timing really works well with our strategic plan. Any questions on this board resolution?
Final point, I love the connection and clarity that you just talked about from like this $1.1 million, but what that actually means, we can make improvements around our steel and what our teachers are doing. So that level, just that through line is helpful in these spaces, but also as we talk to legislators, whatever spaces we're in, when we create that, it's like, it makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, you do a better job of laying that out because it's so, numbers are so unexciting. But what they do is they represent, the greater work of the district and the greater work of our teachers and the accomplishments of our students directly. Any other questions on the resolution? So as we enter the budget season, and I just want to highlight some of our biggest budget considerations going forward. Obviously, this slide was put together before the last board meeting, so obviously our biggest factor that drives the budget is salary increases, and our largest salary is the CA, which is in negotiations at the time. Beat that. One positive note, we did get our first look rate for our health insurance, and it was 1%. So we were seeing double-digit increases in prescription costs over the years. And as you know, we took some moves to curb that double-digit growth and that tremendous cost. And now we're finally seeing some of the benefit, and we have a 1% increase. So that's roughly worth $700,000 in the district. And that it's combined with other reasons as to why it went down. So also the PSERS rate, which we get in mid-December, it's projected to go up from 34 to 34.7%, which is about a $500,000 swing. Hopefully, in the past 2 years, the rate has not increased at all. So hopefully we don't see that increase this year, but we won't know for another 2 weeks. So provide that update. Our next biggest increase is transportation. We have a 4% increase in our contract throughout the life of it, which is actually not terrible, seeing what some other districts are paying and the cost of transportation, buses and bus drivers, particularly CDL drivers, the past couple of years, with the competition from large delivery companies and large warehousing companies. And finally, our Act 1, as we look forward this year, we have a 4.7% Act 1. Next year, the base index is currently projected to be 3.6 and then 3.5 the year after that. So with our current collective bargaining agreements, they are well lined up to be not in excess of those future Act 1 rates. And hopefully we can keep all of our increases well within Act 1. Any questions on any of these budget considerations going forward?
Just a question around the medical, because that also, this slide was made before we approved the contract, and I know the contract has some changes to premium shares, things like that. Will that 1% change at all, or will it go down, or is that 1% just?
So our rates are based on our 12 to 18 month history of actual claims incurred. So it would take some time in the future for that experience to build backwards and impact our rates. No other questions? I'll have a 10-minute Q&A. No, I'm kidding. All set.
Any questions from the board? Questions or comments? Mr. Schultz?
The question earlier that I was on the edge of my seat around is around the revenue slides being so high. You said there would be an answer. Was it at this meeting you were saying there would be an answer? Okay.
I can provide an answer. So you can see we have a large state revenue receivable and federal revenue receivable. Last year, we took some of those payments, we applied it against the receivables, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. Okay. We are a tad behind on our internal account, but hopefully by December 31st, we will be caught up. Okay. So you shouldn't be seeing a $4.4 million increase in state and 1.7. That'll be more in line. Okay. With expectation. And if you want, we can take a deeper dive in state revenues year over year. We can look at it in detail. It probably wouldn't be a bad idea. Next meeting. That's exciting.
Right. Thanks.
Any other questions? Any comments from all right, motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved, Zachary Epps.
Second, Jennifer Roman.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.